What is up, family? We have another request. Yes, from Indonesia. Indonesia, the world's most unlikely country. I have definitely seen a lot of videos about Indonesia. It it's got areas that look like the slums, and it's got areas that look like paradise. And it's funny. You could literally move. You could walk 3 blocks and go from poor to filthy rich, just like that. You go from like Jakarta to another place, like the slums to Jakarta in a small little walk. I've seen it. I've also seen the 70,000 plus islands. The food is definitely interesting. Very spicy though. But altogether very just a gorgeous place. With some really really nice people. Really really friendly people. At least all the videos I've seen, always friendly, always willing to help. Just good people. Oh, and some got nothing. And they got nothing but smiles and the door's open. You know what I mean? Come in, have a drink with us. Let me get you some food when they have nothing. So that's what intrigues me with this country. But anyway, Indonesia, the world's most unlikely country. All wrapped up in 11 minutes. This should be interesting.
There's something that amazes and vaguely upsets me
Oh,
when it comes.
I think I could probably understand you without subtitles. So how about we help how about we help how about we help Indonesia? How about that? There you go. All right, let's go.
Upsets me when it comes to people living in Australia, and that is the fact that we are seemingly completely unaware. Outside of occasional discussions about taking a 3-day bender in Bali, we're totally unaware or indifferent to how fascinating Indonesia, our northern neighbor, is as a country. Because I mean this
Bali's gorgeous.
in complete sincerity, it is one of the most unusual and fascinating countries on earth today. So, look, normally I make videos about politics or a political situation or like theological, religious topic that I'm interested in. This is more just going to be me responding to this poll, which thank you guys for voting.
Yeah, it really shouldn't work as a country, but it does. It's got so many different religions all working together. They all got their place of worship, and they all get along. They all understand and get along. It really is amazing.
It's basically just going to be me ranting about a country that I find fascinating and telling you facts about it for a couple of minutes. So this is not the traditional super in-depth format. It's just a country that I'm incredibly fascinated by, exists so close to us, and I feel like we all need to know a lot more about it. So let's actually get into it. This is Indonesia. It is an archipelago nation made up of thousands of islands. And one of the things that not a lot of people understand about it is that this country here is the fourth most populated country on Earth. It has upwards of 250 million people in it. It is very close behind the United States in terms of the population ladder of the world. And fascinatingly enough, the largest presidential election in terms of raw votes that happened in 2024 was not the presidential election in the United States, but Indonesia's presidential election in 2024. Actually, that's underselling things. I think it's really important to stress that because of how high turnout is in elections in Indonesia, the last presidential election, for example, upwards of 82% turnout, compared to the US, where they are lucky to get into the mid 60s with voter turnout. The 2024
Because when we see two really shitty candidates, we just those that have that feeling just don't vote. They don't want to vote for a candidate they can't stand. But what are you supposed to do when you're left with two that you can't stand either one? So a lot of people just give up. They're like, it's gonna be 4 years of sucking. So why should I bother even voting? So that's why we have a low percent.
Indonesian presidential election was actually the largest election for a president in terms of total votes cast in human history, with upwards of 160 million votes being cast. It was actually closer to 170 million, which really gives you a sense of the actual scale of Indonesia, not only in terms of its population, but also in terms of size. This is Indonesia laid over some places that you probably have a good frame of reference for. This country is enormous, wider than the United States, and I think the best way to explain it there is it stretches from the Caucasus to Ireland if you were to transpose it over Europe and into Asia. And with that size comes some incredible diversity. Indonesia has upwards of 700 different languages.
That's right. I forgot about that. Crazy, right? You think about that number, that's insane.
Spoken on its thousands of islands. And you may ask yourself, with that amount of like cultural and linguistic difference between people across,
they should all want to kill each other. I know.
across Indonesia, how did it form to become one
They all get along.
nation state? Well,
Yep.
the answer is a common hatred of the Dutch, which is something I think we can all
That is true.
understand. When the Dutch showed up in Indonesia, they were not there to establish a settler colony, like how
Yeah,
the
I
United
swear.
Kingdom established Australia or what would become the United States and Canada. The Dutch were there just to make a shit ton of money. It was purely colonial resource extraction, nothing else. And that led to some very interesting consequences for what Indonesia would become. Because Indonesia, with all the volcanic activity that happens there, with them literally having earthquakes on a daily basis, it's led to some of the most fertile land on Earth, which the Dutch could get a lot of spices out of to sell back in Europe and across the world. And that has an interesting consequence because it was purely a business being run there, not like a settler colony. This was purely colonial resource extraction.
I believe for spices.
The Dutch were just completely uninterested in forcing their culture or their language onto the people of Indonesia, because there was already a pre-existing sort of lingua franca that is like common use language around, and that was Malay. If people were traveling from island to island, they would almost certainly speak some Malay, and that is the language that people between these various like hundreds of different linguistic groups would communicate with if they had to. So the Dutch just decided, you know what? Malay is the official language here, and that is what the whole administration is going to work with. And that form of Malay eventually evolved into what we now call Indonesian. So the Dutch had pretty much just enforced a common tongue onto the people of Indonesia, these hundreds of different religious, ethnic, and linguistic groups, and given them the ability to communicate with one another. And language was actually a pretty important fixation of Indonesian nationalism, because it was understood that when this country comes together, it is going to be one of the most multilingual, diverse countries that has ever existed. And an important concession that needs to be made is that the most populous areas, like places like Java, where they spoke Javanese, can't just take over the whole thing. If Indonesia, in opposition to the Dutch, was going to exist as a unified political entity, it would have to use a language that everybody knew, and hence why Indonesian became the national language and not, hypothetically, Javanese. That does lead to a very interesting reality, though, where the national language of Indonesia, Indonesian, is almost exclusively a second language in Indonesia.
Yeah.
What will happen is that most people will learn their local dialect, their local language,
Yep.
and then in primary school through high school, they'll learn Indonesian, which will then use to converse with other groups. So interestingly, despite being the national language, no one really learns it from birth in Indonesia, which I think is pretty fascinating. Could you imagine
It is.
if New South Wales spoke German and Western Australia spoke Spanish and, I don't know, South Australia spoke French and so on and so on, but then we all agreed, you know what? Let's all just speak English whenever
Yes. Yeah.
we have to talk to each other. We'll all agree to learn that language,
Yeah.
and that's how we'll communicate with one another. But anyway,
That is crazy if you think about it.
that's enough about the language. Moving on. Over to religion, which has been a keen focus of mine lately on this channel.
Yeah.
Indonesia,
Religion.
very interestingly, and not a lot of people will know this off the top of their heads, Indonesia is the largest, in terms of population, the largest Muslim majority country on Earth. But you have to understand, Islam in Indonesia had a very unique path to success, which we really haven't seen to the scale at which it worked anywhere else in the world. Islam came to Indonesia through trade. as everything tends to happen with Indonesia, somehow relating to trade, is that when it arrived in Indonesia, it was through merchants coming and trying to evangelize and like spread the word of Islam and convert people to it. But because it wasn't really done from a place of power, it was very open to the cultural practices that already existed of the people that were converting over. So massively influenced by the pre-existing Buddhist and Hindu traditions that existed in Indonesia, and also by folk religion and animism, which gives Islam in Indonesia, at least like the mainstream versions of it, a very different, is flavor insensitive? A very different feel to what you might think of Islam as, particularly in comparison to the Middle East. But despite
big
the
time
fact
different.
that it is
Very different.
almost 90% Muslim in terms of share of population,
Yep.
Indonesia is officially a secular nation. And part of that is because that religious minority, that 10 to 13% of people that don't practice Islam, it's very geographical. And I'll put it up in this map here. You can see that particularly in the country's west, it is overwhelmingly Muslim. But there are some standout areas. Bali there, for example, is the only majority Hindu province in the entire country.
Yeah.
Overwhelmingly so. But then as you get out to the west, you see that the country becomes predominantly, if not overwhelmingly, Christian. So if Indonesia were established as a de facto or just 100% Muslim nation from the start, the country would not have survived. And at the moment, there are, I think, 6 official religions recognized and respected by the Indonesian constitution. That is Islam, Catholicism, Protestantism, so 2 forms of Christianity, Hinduism, Buddhism, and Confucianism. So Indonesians have from the beginning...
So confused with Confucianism. No.
Understood that even though there is an overwhelming Muslim majority, that there is a very significant religious minority that must always be respected, and that they are just as Indonesian as other people. There are some political parties in Indonesia that don't vibe with that, but the overwhelming consensus is that Indonesia is a secular society. But part of the weirdness of this country is that respect for diversity from province to province when it comes to religion has led to such weird outcomes. I mean, Indonesia is a country. This is one country where there are certain places like Flores in the country's south where it's over 83% Catholic. But at the same time, in the same country, there's a province in the west which, by law, enforces Sharia law. In one country, you can, first of all, visit the 9th largest mosque on earth. Then you can visit the largest Buddhist temple on earth, and then you can go take a day trip.
I've seen both of those videos. Amazing.
To
Amazing.
a small island that has nearly 3,000 Catholic churches on it. And look, that like radical shift from province to province is also on the political level, because of the 38 provinces, there's one that just happens to be a monarchy within the broader Indonesian Republic. So you could be walking along, cross a provincial border, and go from a democratic state into a sub-national monarchy. And I don't think there are many, if any, examples like that in the Western world that I can think of. I'm sure there are sub-regions.
You want to just, the closest we got is you could drive from a democratic state to a Republican state. And then obviously all the views change, but that's as close as you're going to get over here on the West.
Monarchies in plenty of developing nations. But the idea that I could cross into Queensland and then abruptly the form of government entirely shifts and suddenly I have to respect the president of the state of Queensland, that's kind of beyond me. I could go on about Indonesia for a while, but I'm trying to pace myself. It's such a fascinating country, and I hope that I've at least outlined a couple of facts that point to how amazingly interesting this country right on the doorstep of Australia actually is. And to my 1 or 2 Indonesian subscribers, I see you.
To my 1 or 2. Hey, I used to have thousands. Where'd you guys go? I know the channel went down and I lost you all. You all disappeared. You remember? Kopi Mana Kopi? This video's man tap. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Guys are all gone. I know. It happens. It happens.
Saya tidak mengerti bahasa Indonesia.
Oh, shit. You're gonna... Oh, shit. Whoa. Wish I could do that. He did that really good.
To Indonesian subscribers, I see you. Saya tidak mengerti bahasa Indonesia, tapi I hope nothing was too off base here and that you guys
Busted out the Indonesian.
thought it was somewhat of an honest breakdown of how fascinating
It is.
actually is.
You did good.
Thank you guys listening for my quick rant about this country, and I hope that you appreciate the incredible country that lies just to our north.
I probably have done 200 to 300 videos on Indonesia easily over the years. So yeah, it's a very interesting country.
If you're Australian. There's some...
Oh, well, I don't know who this guy is, but he did very well. He did very well. He didn't say anything I haven't heard before, but in a much shorter format. And it's fun to see someone else also as intrigued with this country as I am. It's definitely an interesting country. There's no doubt about it. Like I said, really, really nice people. Seriously, really nice people. Anyway, Indonesia, the world's most unlikely country. Isn't that the truth? Take care. Peace out. Have a good one. Kopi mana kopi. Man tap.